In the last class, we talked about, or we started talking about the third area that we are covering in this introduction to foundations of Islamic economics. The third question was how to develop Islamic economics. And what we did in the last session was we tried to connect the discussion about developing Islamic economics from the sources of knowledge. So we talked about the definition of Islamic economics. Islamic economics, having the word Islam in front of it, means that it is based on Islam. And when you talk about based on Islam, means you're talking about the sources of knowledge on Islam, in Islam. And therefore, we then discussed, this relationship between the Sharia, fiqh, and the process or the procedures involved, and the knowledge of this process and procedures, which we term as usul al-fiqh. What we also mentioned in the previous session was that we want to develop Islamic economics, and therefore we may need to have a slightly different usul. Yeah? So we are making the case that in order to develop Islamic economics, or for that matter, any what do you call it, social science or human science, while we can get benefit from usul al-fiqh, but we may need to actually develop our own methodology to develop social sciences. All right, and I think this needs to be more time needs to be spent talking about this methodology of social sciences that we need to build. We ended the last class or the last session by showing a diagram, which is a standard diagram that we use when we want to talk about Islamization of knowledge, or now we use the term integration of knowledge, where we talk about integrating two sources. One is our knowledge that we get from our Islamic heritage, Turath al-Islami, and on the other hand, we have modern knowledge, modern sciences, modern disciplines, if we want to limit it to modern economics, right? So we have our Islamic legacy on the one hand, and on the other hand, we have modern economics. So if we want to develop contemporary Islamic economics, we need to be able to integrate these two sources to develop this contemporary Islamic economics. So our approach, at least as far as Islamization of knowledge is concerned, we do not reject everything from modern knowledge. At the same time, we don't accept everything from our Turath in order to, make up Islamic economics today. It has to be a critical evaluation of both sides and integrate together. All right. So we ended on that note, and so today we want to just continue with that discussion. In order for us to be able to talk about how we go about developing Islamic economics in today's class, and also maybe a little bit in the final session next week, we will be talking about today Islamization of knowledge, and maybe in the next class we will focus on model building of Islamic economics. So we're going to talk about some methodological principles today under the discussion of Islamization of knowledge. And then if we have time today, but I think most likely will be in the next class, in the next session, we talk about applying this in the process of developing models in Islamic economics. So very briefly, when we talk about Islamization of knowledge, the idea is, as we said in the previous session, it is a process in which we want to benefit both from our Turath al-Islami as well as modern science. So that process of integration is very, very important. It is not a new agenda. I'm sure you have joined other sessions in our various series. It has been around since the 1970s, late 70s, in this part of the world, Professor Naqib Al-Attas. And then, of course, we have Almarhum Ismail Farouqi and IIIT, who also were major proponents. But in addition to proponents, there is also critics of Islamization of knowledge. And I think if we want to do an objective analysis of the last almost 50 years of well, 40 plus years of Islamization of knowledge, one thing we can all agree, Islamization of knowledge has not been a static agenda. It has evolved over the years. Yeah? If you look at the initial work plan of Almarhum Ismail Farouqi, and then later on in the 90s, we had modifications of that work plan. So Islamization of knowledge work plan, or the IOK work plan, is a dynamic work plan. It is not static. I remember Dr. Hamid Abu Sulaiman, when he was our rector in IIUM for 10 years, he used to say, Islamization of knowledge is a process of moving towards a moving target. Yeah? So you can imagine, you are moving towards a target, but the target is moving also. Yeah? So it is constantly evolving. And I think this is a very good way to look at it, because if you say that it is a static target, it is not true, because our discussion about contemporary Islamic economics is always changing with the time and with the space. So moving towards a moving target is a very interesting idea. We may want to discuss this a bit more. Now, although initially the agenda was called Islamization of knowledge, and this went on for almost 20 years, after 9/11, you know, it became more difficult for us to continue using the terminology Islamization of knowledge, especially if you are talking about this in the West, whether it is in America or in Europe. And therefore, IOK officially has now been re-termed integration of knowledge. All right. Now, for us, I suppose in this part of the world, in Malaysia, in Indonesia, in other Muslim countries, we may not have a problem if we want to continue to talk about Islamization of knowledge. But as I will also, maybe if we have time, actually when you look at the terminology, Islamization of knowledge is only half of the story. It doesn't tell you the other half. Yeah. So I don't know whether I mentioned it in the last session. When you Islamize, you are actually talking about modern knowledge. So you Islamize modern economics. Yeah, the process involves critical evaluation of modern economics from Islamic perspective. That process is Islamization. But then what do you do with the Torah? What do you do with fiqh and usul fiqh? You don't Islamize it, right? So when we use the term Islamization of knowledge, sometimes some people get confused about how you can say we use Torah and modern knowledge, but you are not Islamizing the Torah. Okay, so you have to do something else to the Torah. And in IIUM, we use the term relevantization. Okay, relevantization. This is a term that our Kuliah of Islamic Revealed Knowledge and Human Sciences, they had many meetings and they came up with this term relevantization. Maybe you want to say contextualization. You want to, you know, put the Torah in its context today. Yeah? So, but the point is, when we want to develop contemporary Islamic economics, we have to use the two sources. One is the Turath al-Islami, the other one is modern knowledge, in this case maybe economics or social sciences. One side you Islamize, the other one you relevantize. Okay, and these two need to go together to become the new body of knowledge. That process is called integration of knowledge. Anyway, this is how we have been trying to explain the new terminology that is being used by IIIT, integration of knowledge. But the main ideas are still the same. What are the main ideas of Islamization of knowledge? One, we want to talk about critical interaction. Islamization of knowledge is a dialogue process. It is not a one-way, I talk, you listen. It is two sides interacting with each other. All right. So critical interaction. In order to be able to be successful at IOK, you need to be able to master knowledge of modern disciplines as well as Turath al-Islami. Okay, so we are actually talking about creating new scholars who are not only masters of economics, but they are also masters of Turath, right? And this, although it may seem very easy when we put it down on a diagram, but all of us who are in this program today, I think we realize that our education system that we have in most countries, it is not easy for us not only to master one side, yeah? Just to master economics is also not easy. Now we are saying you have to master economics as well as master Turath. And this is major challenge with our current educational system, especially when you look at the structure of universities that we have today, right? And this is why I suppose we talk about the need for Islamic universities. And when you talk about Islamic universities, we're not talking about a university that is only teaching fiqh and usul fiqh or Quran and Sunnah. We are talking about an Islamic university that integrates knowledge. All right, and for those of you who are interested, I think this coming Thursday, we are going to have a session with our current, our rector of IIUM. And IIUM is, an example of what we mean by integration of knowledge. All right. So this idea of Islamization of knowledge is what we need to do in order to develop contemporary Islamic economics. I think we talked about this in the first class. What is Islamization of knowledge? It is a program, it is an agenda that will develop contemporary bodies of knowledge. So in our case, we're talking about economics, finance, etc. It is a critique of modern discipline as well as critical self-assessment. So we are critical of modern disciplines. At the same time, we are critical of our own history, because not everything from our Turath necessarily we need to apply today. I think I mentioned it maybe in the first or second session. If you are reading the works of Ibn Khaldun, although in Ibn Khaldun's Muqaddimah, he talked about low taxes. It doesn't mean that we must accept his view and Islamic economics must only talk about low taxes. Not necessary. We should be given the freedom, if needed, for us to have different types of taxes today, right? So critical evaluation even of our own Torah. As far as Quran is concerned, as we mentioned in the last session, it has general principles. These general principles and values and norms, we have to understand, we have to interpret, we have to apply in our current context, right? So even the Turath, we need to have some critical interaction, all right? So this is the what of IOK. Why we need to have this critical interaction? Why can't we just use modern economics? Because modern economics is a product of Western European civilization, and therefore the worldview is not necessarily the same as Islamic worldview. Therefore, we have to critically evaluate, all right? So this is the what and the why as we apply, all right? Now, When we talk about, let me share, I would like to share with you this diagram. We did it, I think, last week. Where is the sharing? Hold on.
Green button.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to get this. Okay, this one. Okay, you...
Okay.
Let me give you the screen. Okay, last week we had a similar diagram, but I have added now at the bottom. Now, when we talk about contemporary bodies of knowledge, we want to develop Islamic economics and finance. How are we going to do it? The process, we say, integration of knowledge. What do we do to modern knowledge? We Islamize it. What do we do with our Turath? In the case of IIUM, we say we relevantize it. All right. So this process where we are trying to integrate between modern knowledge and Turath in order to create contemporary Islamic economics. This is a task for academics. Okay, so I'm not sure in this group, I think quite a number of you are, maybe you are also thinking about academic career, or some of you may actually be, already a lecturer or even maybe a assistant professor in the area of economics. It is our task as academics to do this. Yeah, we don't expect students to do this. Yeah, this is a task for academics. So if we are talking about curriculum, or even talking about a certain area in Islamic economics, when you want to talk about, let's say, Islamic banking and finance, how much of Islamic banking finance course is going to be coming from, or is going to be made up of Quran, Sunnah, fiqh, okay? And then how much will be modern banking and finance? This is a very major discussion. Why? Because when we teach in a university, you have to teach a course. I do not know about all your universities, but certainly in many universities, our semester is 14 weeks. 14 weeks is one course. We have to decide in that 14 weeks, what is it that you take from the Turath, what you take from modern knowledge, how you integrate the two, right? And then the capability of the lecturer to be able to do that. This is a very important process of developing contemporary Islamic economics. Yeah. So it is not just I call it Islamic banking finance, but I teach totally modern banking and finance. I just put a verse of Quran here, I put a hadith there, and then I say this is Islamic banking finance. That's not possible. It must have that integration, right? I must be teaching Islamic banking finance, but I must be talking about banking and finance. But Islamic banking finance, right? I cannot be just quoting ayat Quran and hadith and I say this is Islamic banking and finance. Yeah, so this is a task for the academics. All right. So the output that we deliver must already be Islamized. Now, what makes it more complicated? We want to develop contemporary Islamic economics. All right. We want to utilize the Turath. We want to utilize modern knowledge. We want to integrate the two. But in the Turath, it is not just fiqh. We also have usulul fiqh, right? Fiqh is part of Turath, but fiqh was developed through usulul fiqh. Then you have modern economics, let's say theory of consumer behavior. But this theory of consumer behavior also follows a certain methodology. So in these two bodies of knowledge, Turath and modern knowledge, we have substantive knowledge and methodological knowledge. When you want to integrate the two sides, Turath and modern knowledge, you cannot just put the two together because both sides developed with a different methodology. In modern economics, there is no recognition of Quran or Hadith as sources of knowledge. So you are now going to tell people who are teaching Islamic economics, if you want to develop Islamic economics, you must refer to Quran and Hadith. Modern economics doesn't refer to it, right? Similarly, when you look at the Turath, there may be certain things in the Turath that are not relevant for the modern context. You have to maybe modify them. Why? Because today we have a banking and financial system that has got no connection to the banking, or even if you want to call it banking, to the way that we were doing transactions 700-800 years ago. So how can you just use the Torah and the discussion that was there 600-700 years ago and bring it to our modern context? So both sides need to be critically evaluated, but both sides also have different methodology. Therefore, when we want to integrate the two, we must have, if possible, a unified methodology. So we have one methodology that is able to deal both with Turath as well as modern knowledge. And as far as we know today, unfortunately, we are not able so far to come up with this unified methodology, right? So one of the reasons maybe why we are conducting all these courses and promoting Islamization of knowledge, because we want to establish and develop this unified methodology. All right, so this task is more complicated because we have to not only master the substantive knowledge, but we also have to master methodological knowledge. This is a major challenge, I think, for many of us. If you are a lecturer, you will know what I mean. Okay, now, in order for us to be able to develop Islamic economics, one is the discipline itself, right? You need to develop this discipline called Islamic economics. But who is the one that is developing the discipline? It is the human being. Therefore, you also need to Islamize the individual human being as well. All right, so I put a question here. If the person doing Islamization must also undergo Islamization himself or herself, all right? Can Islamization of knowledge be a universal agenda? Because we say that Islamic economics, Islamic banking must be for all humanity. It is not only for Muslims, right? And you all, I think last week somebody asked, what about, in Islamic banking finance, there are people who are non-Muslims and who are teaching and promoting Islamic banking finance. Yeah? So if you are going to be presenting Islamic economics, Islamic banking, Islamic finance, you must also undergo Islamization yourself. Okay. Now, we here, of course, we are not talking about Islamization in the context of becoming a Muslim, but you must appreciate what Islamic economics is all about. So even a non-Muslim, as long as they accept the Islamic values and principles and norms that govern economic activity, they are also capable of teaching and promoting Islamic economics and finance. But this is an important point. But I just wanted to raise this question because some people feel that this is a major challenge. As far as human knowledge is concerned, Islamization of knowledge is primarily an epistemological and methodological concern. This is the definition given by many of our scholars on Islamization of knowledge. So what does Islamization of knowledge mean? And now I'm trying to combine the definition of Islamization of knowledge that was given by Professor Alatas and Ismail Faruqi. I'm now putting it into economics context. So Islamization of knowledge, according to Professor Alatas, is de-Westernizing modern knowledge. So now we have to de-Westernize modern economics. We have to take away those elements in modern economics that represent the Western European worldview. We have to replace it with Islamic values and principles. Yeah? So de-Westernization of knowledge. And then infusing with Islamic values, maybe the Islamization. And Professor Almarhum Ismail Faruqi, Islamization of knowledge is recasting modern economics. That means you have to change the shape of modern economics by doing what? Certain things you eliminate, you take away. Certain things you amend. Certain things you reinterpret. Certain things you adapt according to the worldview of Islam. So again, you see in this definition also, we are not throwing away everything from modern economics. And I think, as I mentioned, I think in the first session or second session, I don't see this idea of rejecting everything from the West as being an Islamic, requirement. Yeah? This has not been our way of Muslims in the past and also of the present. Let's move on. So it is a task for Islamic economics and finance academics, how much you take from Turath, what you take from Turath, and then are we able to interact, yeah? And because of this, you have the two substantive. So now, just imagine, if you want to develop contemporary Islamic economics and finance, you have the Turath, you have modern knowledge. But then, we also know, in the Turath, there are many different schools of thought. In the case of fiqh, there are at least 4, if not 5, if not 6 schools of fiqh. Alhamdulillah, as far as economics is concerned, that is not so much of a problem because we accept different madhab views when we want to develop Islamic economics. For example, if you don't, if you stick strictly to the Shafi'i position, then we cannot have the banks that we have today, because they are practicing something that in the Shafi'i school of thought is not allowed. They're the 2-tier mudarabah. But the other schools of law accept it, and therefore we accept it. Okay? But in modern economics as well, there are many schools of economics. So now the challenge for us, we want to develop contemporary Islamic economics, contemporary Islamic finance. But when you say we want to use economics, which school of economics? When we teach economics in the classroom, we use a certain textbook. And most of our economic textbooks, there are one school of economics called neoclassical economics, mainstream. But there are many other schools of economics, Keynesian economics, institutional economics, some of the more socialist, what do you call it, branches of economics. Which school do we use? Can we learn from all the different schools? I would think we should. Because some of these schools, other than neoclassical economics, they are also critical of neoclassical economics. So we can learn from their criticism, all right? So we need to be able to look at all the different spectrum of schools that you have in both the Turath as well as modern knowledge in order to be able to do this integration. And this is it is not an easy task to do, okay? All right. I think for today, I'm going to stop at this point. What we will do in the next session is basically to apply the process of what I just showed in the diagram in the process of developing models Yeah. So if you are an economics student or a lecturer, you will understand the stages that we are going to do in the next session. First step, second step, you need to develop the let's say a particular area of economics, consumption. You need to develop what I call economic vision of consumption. What do? You refer to Quran, you refer to Hadith. What does the Quran, the Hadith, the secondary sources, what does it say about consumption, right? Then you may want to read the works of variety of scholars. You read the works of contemporary Islamic economists. You read the works of contemporary economists. All of this will help you develop the economic vision of consumption, right? You develop assumptions, you develop your hypotheses, and then you have to test. Okay, so we will talk about this in the next session. But in the meantime, while you are waiting for the next session next week, I would really hope that all of you, I'm not sure whether we can make this available. Maybe if we have a copy, we can give you certain excerpts from Islamization of Knowledge work plan. You can get a better picture of what Islamization of knowledge, or in our contemporary language, we are using the term integration of knowledge. What does it mean? So that next week, when we specifically talk about model building, don't forget what Islamization of knowledge is all about. Okay, so with this, I stop and I welcome some questions from those who are here. Wallahu alam.
Thank you so much, Prof. In fact, this is the first time that we seriously talk about Islamization among the past 5 weeks. Because most of the instructors, they just go to the subject. They are not talking the generalization. They're just going to their subject matter. The famous word that Prof always use is the Islamizers. That's the problem that we have in our universities. Because of these two groups, those from modern background, traditional background, who want to be the Islamizers. Okay, we have a long question from Brother Nuruddin. Let me read it. As far as I know, in the original work of Faruqi, the issue of integration has also been discussed. But the term stressed by Faruqi is the Islamization of knowledge. In relation to the current decolonization of knowledge trend, I feel this term is not problematic because it emphasizes the importance of getting out of the Western world. First, before then, we can rethink new relationship between Turath or modern. While in the latter scheme, as far as I know, the emphasis is some of control knowledge. Can you give a response?
Yeah, thank you very much to Nuruddin. I think you have actually said what I was mentioning just now. You know, I think we have to understand when the term Islamization of knowledge was used in the late 70s. Well, it was even used earlier than that, but I think when we talk about our contemporary major proponents of Islamization of knowledge, we are talking about these two, Professor Latas and Ismail Faruqi and IIIT. When this term was used, you have to put it in the background of the Muslim world. You have a situation where the Muslim world is just coming, alive. Yeah, we are coming up from the sleep that we have been having for the many decades, if not centuries before that. And we are starting, because of independence of many of the developing countries and in the Muslim world, we are looking for solutions in our own heritage. So this term Islamization of knowledge was used at a time when the idea was to wake up the Muslims and say that Islam has the solution. And I think when you read Almarhum Ismail Faruqi's work plan, it is very clear that he is talking about two inputs. the Turath as well as modern knowledge, right? So you are right when you say that Al-Marhum Ismail Faruqi is talking about Islamization of knowledge. Although when you quickly look at the work plan, he doesn't talk about modern knowledge, but he's referring to modern knowledge, Islamization of modern knowledge. And certainly in the case of Prof. Al-Attas, he mentions Islamization of contemporary knowledge. But that is only one side, right? One side. What do you do to the Torah? You have to also do something to the Torah. And so this is why I look at the terminology integration of knowledge as something that is quite natural, that we can still use IOK, right? Instead of Islamization of knowledge, okay, we are saying integration of knowledge. The reason is very straightforward. In today's world, it is politically difficult for you to use this term Islamization, especially in the Muslim world. Even in the non-Muslim world. Even in the Muslim world, it is not easy in some parts of the Muslim world to talk about Islamization, because it gives all kinds of different meanings to different people. Although we are talking about knowledge, yeah? And I think this is why for a long time, we still tried to say Islamization of knowledge. But unfortunately, you know, there are many forces at work outside. Any reference to Islamization makes it problematic. So we are talking about this integration of knowledge. I agree with you. We need to get out of the Western worldview. And that is why Professor Al-Attas and also Ismail Faruqi in some of his other writings, maybe not so much in the work plan, he talked about the need to de-Westernize, yeah, to de-Westernize, because that's what our disciplines are. Yeah, and I think when we talk and give example on economics in the next session, you will see what we mean, because all models and all theories, they are based on assumptions. And if the assumptions that we are using are not relevant to Muslims and are not consistent with the Islamic worldview, why are we teaching it? Right? So we need to get out of the Western worldview. And when you do that, you need to replace it with the Islamic. Our challenge also is, when you replace with Islamic worldview, sometimes the behavior of the Muslim is not in line with that worldview. The behavior of Muslims sometimes is in line with the economic man, not with Islamic man. So Islamization of knowledge will require you to Islamize the agent, the human being, not necessarily only look at the discipline per se. Even the human being has to be Islamized. Yeah, but then becomes very sensitive. You want to Islamize the human being. So are you talking about making everybody Muslim? No. Everybody follows the values and principles of Islamic economics, whether you are Muslim or not Muslim. I don't see a problem with that. Yeah, maybe
Okay.
somebody.
For one small historical that some people may overlook, Faruqi Abdul Hamid was responding to the young Muslim mind who studied in the West in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. That was the term being catch fire for this group of people they are addressing. Maybe you can address that, Prof?
Yeah, in fact,
circle context.
yeah. This is a very important point, because one of the criticism of Al-Marhum Ismail Faruqi's work plan is that, oh, he starts with mastering modern knowledge. Okay, number one is mastering modern knowledge. So some people criticize, by stressing the modern knowledge, you are getting caught in the Western worldview, in the Western paradigm. Okay, and therefore it is very difficult for you to talk about Islamic economics, because you are already drowning in the modern economic paradigm. You have to understand who was Ismail Faruqi, who was his audience. Yeah, he was based in America, and his audience are the young Muslim youth who are studying in America. And Muslims go to America not to study the Quran or not to study the Hadith. They go to America to study economics, right? So you don't want to tell them, go and throw away all your economic books because you are not. This is not the right thing to do. You tell them to become a good economist, but at the same time, be critical of that economics, right? So if you look at the way the sequencing was done, yes, he focused on modern economics, but that's because he's dealing with, sorry, modern knowledge. He's dealing with the environment in America, the students from all over the Muslim world going to study in America. So the idea is you must be able to critically evaluate the modern discipline, all right? And this is the role of the academic. It is Ismail Faruqi himself who used to be able to de-Westernize, if I can use that term, yeah, and present a new approach to dealing with modern science. Of course, Ismail Faruqi was somebody in the area of comparative religion, in the area of comparative philosophy. So he was not somebody who went into individual disciplines, right? This has to be done by economists.
Okay, Prof. This from Habibu. I respectfully want Prof to tell us whether AOFI standards are in line with integration of knowledge in Islamic finance. We heard all this term all the time. Islamic
Yeah, I mean,
banking.
well, this IOFI is an organization based in, I'm not sure, is it Bahrain or in Emirates, and they basically try to come up with certain standards to guide Islamic banking and finance. Yeah. Now, there are people who would also criticize IOFI because they will say that you are also trying to work within the existing framework of modern banking finance, and then you try to see how Islamic banking fits in. But just like Islamization of knowledge, I believe what is needed is you need to be able to critically evaluate the current standards in Islamic banking and finance. Now, whether we are able to do it sufficiently or not, this will be the level of expertise of those people in AUFI. They are training in both Turath as well as modern Islamic banking and finance. And as I mentioned just now, it's not easy to have people who are masters of both. Okay, either you have people who are coming from the Islamic studies or Sharia background, and they may not have formal knowledge in banking and finance. On the other hand, you may have people in banking finance, they don't have formal knowledge in Sharia. So how do you talk about these new contemporary standards for Islamic banking and finance unless the people who are there have both? So you need to create the people, all right? But from what I know, AUFI is one of the leading organizations that are trying to develop these standards. I have to say, I myself, I don't, this is very much people who are more interested in these standards, and most of the time, these are the accountants. So in IIUM or in Malaysia, the ones who are very much interested in AUFI standards will be the auditors. And usually auditors will have accounting background, all right? So you need to have accountants, right, that have the ability, and I'm looking at the comment of Afrad, as far as I know, AUFI are relating to Sharia standard, accounting standard, audit standard, governance standard. So these are all the areas that accountants do, the auditing thing. Yeah? It's very rare that economists will do this. Although you may have some economists, but very much accounting, because this is what the AUFI is. It is something to do with all these standards that this body does. AUFI Sharia standard is very fiqh mu'amalah. Yes, of course. That's what one of the standards are they are looking at fiqh muamalah. You know, let me just give you an example. In Malaysia, we also try to develop curriculum standards. Yeah? And in the case of Malaysia, one standard that was developed was muamalat and Islamic finance. That is the area that they want to look at. In the case of IIUM, we don't have any program called muamalat and Islamic finance. Our degree is called Islamic finance or Islamic banking and finance, right? But sometimes the people who come up with these standards, they are thinking about muamalat. So if you look at curriculum, and I wish there will be maybe another session just to talk about curriculum. If you look at Islamic economics programs or Islamic banking and finance program, so much of fiqh in the curriculum. Sometimes you don't need so much fiqh. You need the fiqh to be integrated in the banking already, right? You don't need to have fiqh 1, fiqh 2, fiqh 3 courses being taught in Islamic banking courses, because these students are not going to become fiqh scholars. Right? They need to have some knowledge of fiqh, but there is no need for so many fiqh courses. So rather than this mindset is always on fiqh muamalat, you have to actually think about Islamic economics. That's what you want. What are Turath literature that the Islamic? I think this question somebody asked a few weeks ago also. We have a big problem with this Turath literature, yeah, because one of the research projects that IIIT promoted in the work plan, we must be able to get researchers who have the expertise to go and research on our Turath and to make that Turath literature available to us today. But many of you, I'm sure if you are academics, you will realize there are not many works that have been done that talk about Turath in relation to economics, for example. As I keep telling people in different sessions, I think there are just 2 or 3 people who are in this area and who are productive. There may be many people in the area, but they are not producing many articles or books. But we have a few people. One name that comes to mind is Abdul Azim Islahi, who is now in King Abdul Aziz University in Jeddah. One person has done quite a lot of work in the area of public finance. So he has looked at different scholars who have been writing from the 11th century to 12th century, 13th century, 14th century, but only in the area of public finance. And even then, I'm quite sure he may not have covered everybody. One person only, right? So we have to have more scholars who are interested to do research in our Turath and to be able to present to the economists of today what the Turath says about different topics in economics, public finance, riba, socio-economic justice, many other areas. Yeah, we must have this work, but unfortunately, today we don't have enough people in this area. All right. Agus Arwani, how is the application of modern knowledge in the field of Islamic accounting? I have to apologize. Accounting is not my area. Maybe Prof. Nuraini later can discuss this if she takes a course soon. But I do know that in the area of accounting, it is a very specific discipline. In accounting, it is very, I don't want to say narrow, but in any program in accounting in Malaysia, they don't have many courses outside accounting because it's a professional qualification. They have to get all the agreement from the professional bodies, right? So our accounting program in IIUM, there's just about 3 or 4 courses that the student can choose for Islamic inputs. zakat accounting, auditing for Islamic financial institutions, auditing for Islamic bank, something like that. So they're just 3 or 4 courses. That's the Islamic input. Most of the other courses will be the conventional part. So maybe you need to get an accountant, a lecturer in accounting to talk about how they handle the accounting courses and how they look at Islamic perspective on accounting, curriculum and syllabus. Any other question? Yeah.
We always mention Faruqi Najib Alatas. Can you just briefly mention about this? Fazlur Rahman, Syed Hussein Nasar also in the same league.
Okay, so when I was initially in the early 2000s, I wanted to do research in the area of methodology of Islamic economics, exactly the topic that we are talking today. Yeah, so I started. It was my area of interest, so I started reading some works in methodology of economics and methodology of Islamic economics. I came to the conclusion very few of our scholars are actually talking about methodology of Islamic economics. Most of them are focusing on the methods that we use or the tools that we use. And this is not methodology. So instead of writing on methodology of Islamic economics, I decided to do a survey on Islamization of knowledge, because Islamization of knowledge was the big framework. So I started reading on Islamization of knowledge, and I had this survey that I did. Yeah, so it's a book that has come out, and I looked at main proponents. So the 2 main proponents, Said Naqib Alatas and Ismail Faruqi. And then you got the supporters, people who supported the Islamization of knowledge agenda. They modified maybe the original work plan. People like, Ismail Faruqi, I would also put him together with Dr. Hamid Abu Sulaiman, and the pioneers of IOK. Yeah? They worked together in order to develop not only the original work plan, but the modified work plan. Then you have other people who develop areas of the work plan, like Loai Safi. I think he did some very good work trying to develop in more detail some of the problematic areas of Islamization of knowledge. These are the supporters of Islamization of knowledge. Then you have other scholars, Muslim scholars. They may not have been supporting Islamization of knowledge as presented by Almarhum Ismail Faruqi, but they were also very busy and very committed to promoting Islamic perspective of knowledge. Yeah. So the names mentioned by Brother Shahran, you have Fazlur Rahman Almarhum, you have Syed Hussein Nasar, who's still with us. They had different approaches how to develop Islamic knowledge or Islamic science. Yeah? Syed Hussein Nasar, he has his own approach. Sometimes people term it traditionalism. All right. And then Fazlur Rahman, he had a different approach. He focused on the Turath much more. Yeah, to him, the main problem was the Turath. We need to go back, understand the Turath, and then, I forget the term he used, double, go back to history and then come back, bring it to the present. Yeah. So he developed, and these writers, they were debating and having discussions among themselves. You know, the 1980s and early 90s are wonderful periods of contemporary Muslim scholarship, and I wish all of you will take the effort to read, you know, the different schools of thought trying to promote Islamic perspective of disciplines and knowledge. in order for you to better understand. There's a question here which is really not my, yeah, how can we connect public health and Islam? This you need to get somebody else to talk about. Yeah, I have no. Of course, today it's very important in the COVID-19, but really you need to get somebody in the area of public health. I'm sure we can get somebody. We have our.
Yep, we get Prof. Omar next season,
Yeah,
next session.
right.
Yeah,
Yes,
Prof.
yes.
Kasuri, yeah.
Prof. Kasule is the person in public health. It would be wonderful for him to, you know.
Okay, Prof. It will be very, very interesting. Alhamdulillah, now also Prof. Anis talking about figures, contemporary figures.
Okay.
I mean, not the contemporary, his contemporary, like Aslam, and he will be talking about Iqbal and who next week. So I think we will ask him to talk about these figures.
Yeah,
Fadl
yeah. Why
Rahman,
not?
Hussein
Yeah, yeah,
Nasar,
yeah.
because
Yeah,
they were together. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
it'll be
So,
interesting to see what you comment.
yeah.
Okay, Prof. Final word for tonight.
Well, all I thank everybody for staying on, and we have one more session. I think next week. And like I said, I will spend the time focusing on model building. So if anybody is interested, if you're an economist, I think it's very straightforward. Just go and read the section in your book on model building, and hopefully when we give the example that we're going to give next week, you will all be able to understand what we mean by how we can combine this Islamization or integration of knowledge agenda when we want to develop contemporary Islamic economics. Sorry, Brother Shahran, there is one. What about Ziauddin Sardar, who says that Islamization project is not radical? Well, I'm not sure whether he says it is not radical, but he was one of the critics, as I mentioned to you just now. He was criticizing certain issues with regard to the sequencing, as well as also talking about the fact that he feels that Islamization of knowledge agenda ends up, you get caught in the Western paradigm. So this was his criticism. But really, when you see what he says as his alternative, it is also being said by people who are proponents of Islamization of knowledge. Sometimes, there are different views about how to develop Islamized knowledge. People have different opinions. When you look at what they are proposing, actually, they are not very far away. They just differ in certain things. So I would like to see that all these criticisms help to develop Islamization of knowledge agenda or integration of knowledge agenda. If you want to know who said it is not radical enough, please read Tariq Ramadan. Tariq Ramadan view was Islamization of knowledge is not what he called transformational reform. Yeah? He termed Islamization of knowledge as not going far enough. What we have in Islamization of knowledge, he says, is adaptation or adaptive reform. He wants to go for transformational reform. And that's why his book is called Radical Reform. Yeah? So, very interesting book. Maybe we can also, at one time in the future, if things are okay, we may even invite these critics to come and talk about their views, yeah, on how to develop Islamic sciences and disciplines. Wallahu a'lam.
Thank you so much, Prof. I will discuss with Prof for next session. Maybe another 7-week lectures on Islamization of knowledge, bringing all of these scholars. Yeah, inshallah. Interesting. Okay, Prof. See you next week, inshallah.
Inshallah.
See everyone.
Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.